Hello, it's Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today's guest is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Well, thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
Yeah, great to see you, Jonathan. And let's discuss what's happened in the last few days. There are still ongoing efforts to uh, peaceful negotiations, or would you call it?
Mixed results, although I suspect that this is becoming a educational process for the current Trump administration, and in that they're discovering that no real deal is possible in the sense that they understand it, and that they are essentially compelled to incrementally, if not more forcefully, increase the pressure on Russia through both through sanctions, if wherever possible, as well as increased military aid to Ukraine in cooperation with its European allies, and just basically increasing the level of, I say they're going to increase the level of pain until eventually either uh, the less likely outcome is that Russia voluntarily says, "Oh, the heck with this. Let's just declare victory and go home," or you know, what I also possible is that Ukraine succeeds in inflicting a decisive operational defeat on the Russian forces in the battlefield. And you know what we've discussed what my relative choices of probability of victory would be, but there is I'm still based on Ukraine's historical performance in this war thus far. I'm counting on Ukraine to be able to inflict a decisive surprise upon the Russian forces. What would you say?
Well, would be great. You see, I'm suspicious that Ukraine is not rushing into any aggressive operations of any kind
Mm-hmm.
because they are scared to infuriate Trump.
Mm.
They,
That
uh,
that that might be I can see your point on that one
yeah,
because what they would not want that what they would not want it would be a repeat of the unfortunate experience they had earlier in the year when suddenly for temporarily you know President Trump and the Department of Defense stopped aiding Ukraine for temporarily, and that looked like they were afraid that President Trump was going to sell them down the river to Russia. And it turned out once Russia demonstrated that its intentions were not at all honorable or peaceful, despite what President Trump's intentions may have been to to create a lasting peace, where in fact there is no possibility of peace in the sense that we understand it. Once that has occurred, the Trump administration, at least President Trump, has shown his willingness to change his mind or to have his mind changed by circumstances. So this is a very interesting, but I definitely understand Ukraine's reluctance to share. Well, for one thing, I'm almost certain that the Ukrainians are not sharing everything they know, or that if they don't share everything that they do not share. They will not share everything that they are planning. They're going to keep some of their cards concealed, just like any good poker player would. And so what they are doing is that they are going to watch the situation very carefully. They are continuing to inflict superior losses on the Russian forces, and they are continuing to damage Russian infrastructure, both their logistics and their oil refineries. They're basically continuing to damage the Russian economy. And eventually it's going to reach a point where Ukraine should see an opportunity for it to undertake a decisive counterattack, counteroffensive in a selected area where they think it will do the most good and have the most effect. So, yes, but in the meantime, they are not going to be talking to the world at large, and certainly not to the United States, about all of their intentions and all of their capabilities that they are developing. So, yes, I understand their caution. Given the history of this conflict and how the actors have behaved, yeah. I don't blame the Ukrainians for being cautious or even anxious.
okay. Let's talk about Trump's just recent messages. So, Hungary and Slovakia complained to Trump that Ukraine is destroying this um, the pipeline, the gas pipeline,
Mhm.
Druzhba, so-called, which goes into both countries. And Trump said something, I don't want to hear about that. It's horrible. Okay. Then he, on the other hand, he encourages Ukraine to attack Moscow. So what's the logic here? So you can attack Moscow, but you cannot attack the this pipeline, which is on your territory.
Mhm.
John, what do you think? What you do?
Hmm. I think that again, he is still thinking in terms of economics rather than military. Remember, he is not a military man. He is basically someone with a very economic deal making frame of mind. So he looks at attacks on economic infrastructure, how wherever they're located, as oh no, you can't, you shouldn't do that. But hitting Moscow, okay, he would probably not understanding necessarily the full military implications of it, and not understanding that just hitting Moscow is not by itself decisive. Yes, it's going to bring home the reality of the war to the Russian people. Yeah, that's true. But it does not have as decisive a military effect as what Ukraine is doing to the rest of Russia, to its economic infrastructure, to its logistic capability, to its oil refineries, to all aspects of its being able to carry on offensive operations against Ukraine. In that sense, attacks against everything else except Moscow will have a cumulatively more decisive effect than just attacking Moscow, because all of Russia's capability is not centered in Moscow.
Jonathan, what worries me is that for almost 8 months, U.S. and specifically Donald Trump conducts with Russia so-called Geschäft diplomacy, sending Witko, making phone calls to Putin, offering him to develop Arctica and selling together the Russian gas to Europe and many other wonderful things. You see, this is the weakness of today's administration, that there are no specialists on Russia and Eastern Europe. And
Yeah,
nobody
gee, what a
advises,
shame! What a shame!
yeah, well,
It
they
almost
fired everybody,
right. Well, if they hired me, then I'd have to leave the show. Gee, what would you do? No, I'm just kidding. Right now, I would be, if I seeing what I see, being part of the current administration, that would be like walking into the middle of a barroom brawl. It would. I mean, I would have to be very cautious and have to be very cautious and be on my best behavior. And so, and mind you, I'm used to that, having been a career intelligence officer and having been in the Department of Homeland Security, and in both environments, I learned very carefully that one of the things you do not ever do, is lose your temper. You use your temper and you fly off the handle, and you tend to shorten your career and your prospects for success.
well,
So
you have
that,
your retirement and enjoy your life. That's the worst
exactly.
case scenario.
Exactly. It's the worst case scenario. Actually, the worst case scenario, I hardly call it a worst case, is the scenario that I'm in now. Where basically I have a retirement from the Army and retirement from Homeland Security and so forth. And so, my situation is okay. I work and do the things I need to do because I want to, not because I have to in order to, put bread and butter on the table and I'll do the other things. But the interesting thing is that the Trump administration, joining the Trump administration is not for the timid of heart. It is not something you do just for the fun of it, because it would not necessarily be very fun. But
Okay,
anyway,
if he would have the Russian educated and uh, people knowledgeable in Russian history and Russian present foreign affairs, and not only foreign affairs, but its internal affairs, they would very early explain Trump why this Geschäft diplomacy is not working.
right.
Essentially, he's offering Putin that he already has many times over and over. So what
Mhm.
he's telling him that he will get some more money from the oil and gas sold to Europe or some Arctic development or so. Putin is by many believed to be wealthiest man in the world,
Because
far
he can.
richer than Elon Musk.
Right, because he commands those resources like any
Absolutely.
like any absolute ruler would. He did not have to earn them. He did not have to create a business. He
No.
did not have to do with profit motive. He is the complete antithesis of a capitalist, and so therefore that's okay. By President Trump's efforts to show him the potential for mutual prosperity or for deal making means absolutely nothing to him. He might just as well be speaking to President Putin in Swahili. He would not understand it.
Jonathan, so how it could go on for 8 months over and over and over? Even Donald Trump, maybe he's not the brightest businessman in the world, but how much time? It's like preposition uh, uh, to have limitation on your losses. Cover your losses and let your winner run.
Yeah,
It's in the casino, it's in the stock market, it works everywhere.
yeah,
And Trump, well, he's obviously he's an investor. He used to own 6 casinos, so he knows rules of the game. Cover your
mhm,
losses.
yeah.
So how much longer he can be humiliated
Oh,
in this
your question is
moment?
how much longer? Well, I would respond first of all with the old aphorism: "Old habits die hard." Yeah,
Okay.
because it takes a, and oh, by the way, I would say from an intelligence perspective, uh, the, uh, one of the fallacies that the intelligence community, U.S. and certainly the U.S. intelligence community, does its best to avoid is the fallacy known as mirror imaging, the tendency to project your own thinking onto that of your adversary and assume that if your adversary, if you consider yourself to be rational and you consider your opponent or adversary to be rational, the fallacy is that therefore your adversary must see the same situation in the same way that you do. You are assuming they think and react to the situation in your frame of reference, which is not which is hardly ever the case. And so for example, we made that mistake during the Cold War when we assumed that Russia and China that communism, Russian and Chinese communism, were essentially monolithic. That there was there were no differences of perception that could be exploited. And yet, at least certainly from my research, I discovered that when I explored the Soviet perceptions of U.S. strategy, I discovered that very early in my research that the Russians themselves were mirror imaging. They were projecting their logic onto American planners and assuming that we would react to the situation the same way that they would. And this is what led them to build up their strategic nuclear forces. When they saw us changing our strategy during the Cold War in ways that were generally favorable to Soviet foreign policy, they drew the conclusion that the more they increased the size and power of their strategic nuclear arsenal, the more that we would be forced to accommodate our strategy, to change our strategy in accommodation, in adjustment to the growth of their power. And this is what makes them so difficult to negotiate with. That logic has carried over into the post-Cold War period. As you note, the Russian nuclear forces, the Ядерная устрашенная сила, nuclear intimidation forces, that spells out in ways that we apparently still do not appreciate the purpose and motivation behind their nuclear forces. And we both observed how during this entire conflict, the Russians have been brandishing their nuclear arsenal, brandishing the threat of escalation against the West and against the U.S. in basically in a manner intended to intimidate us into being fearful of escalation and hopefully then accommodating ourselves to prevent that at any cost. So this still dominates their perception, is old perceptions die hard. And when the Russians reacted very fearfully to President Reagan's declaration of the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. They greatly overestimated the effectiveness of SDI. They were afraid that the KGB itself sent a report to Gorbachev in April 1985 saying, well, SDI was going to be able to block 90% of Soviet missiles eventually, and that there was no way that the Soviet Union could keep up with this capability. They did not realize that it was a research and development initiative, not really a deployment initiative. But the Russians overreacted. And so now you can understand, for example, why the Russians, both the Russians and the Chinese, react to the proposed Golden Dome. They see it as the serious aspect of SDI based upon the money that they plan to deploy against it. And they both view it as, quote, highly destabilizing. Well, the Golden Dome does not threaten their existence. What they object to is it threatens their power. It threatens their means of leverage. That is the real long-term threat. Again, that's just political. That hasn't yet been fully developed. So right now, you have a very interesting situation in that Putin is caught in a situation where other Western observers have said that he has obviously concluded that his best course of action is to continue the war until he achieves his objectives. He is not going to be open to any peace negotiations. And the Trump administration, while we do not know the true state of their internal deliberations, we can surmise that they are being increasingly confronted with the reality that they are not going to be able to pull off a true negotiated peace. And my prediction is they will be steadily forced over the next few months into giving more and more aid to Ukraine, more and better aid to Ukraine, and applying more and more pressure by various means, short of actual troop intervention or deployment of American troops in Ukraine, to applying pressure to the point where Russia will be compelled to either a ceasefire or to just calling it quits and going home. So, yeah, and again, the bottom line of all of this, the decisive move still belongs to Ukraine. And so what they have to do, in my opinion, is to make use of the best use possible of the means that they acquire and are able to develop themselves over the next several months, and hopefully not as long as a year, but to be able to do it to the point where they can finally stop the Russian offensive, not only stop it, but inflict a decisive reverse in one or more areas of the theater.
Jonathan, I don't want to rain on your parade.
Oh,
Golden Dome.
You're raining on somebody with a very sunshiny personality. Go ahead, rain away.
Jonathan, Golden Dome is a dream. She's not going to materialize in several years, if ever. There is no money for Golden Dome implementation. Now, Russia's role is very different today compared to 2014 or even to 2022. Why? Look at the recent military parade in China. Look at the growing association between China, Russia, India, North Korea, Iran. It's 5 countries for sure. It used to be 2, maybe 3. Now it's 5. And this U.S., the policy of tariffs put India into hugs and kisses with Russia and China and so on. So in a way, U.S. is now in a position when its economic sanctions may not work at all because the G20 or the BRICS plus some countries who joined recently. This is quite substantial market, including for Russian oil and gas. So they don't need anything. In fact, they already cut off the European market, of course, US and so on. So they will, by default, they will increase their efforts to sell their minerals to BRICS countries, the G20 or whatever they call that organization, and the sanctions of U.S. is basically an empty uh, sound, like it does nothing. Now, so the other thing is to provide a military assistance to Ukraine of all kinds, specifically the most developed the ammunition and weapons systems. Because at the end of the day, if you look at this conference of the countries in Europe, recently in France, that will be available their troops to step on in Ukraine, but remember, in case of peace, not in case of continuing war. So this is all wonderful ideas that may not be even available in next 2-3 years, if not more. So therefore, the issue is remaining the same. Ukraine needs to have all means of protecting itself. Because, as you know, the Budapest Memorandum was a joke. But the Article 5th of NATO is a joke. Because if you read it carefully, what it does is if the country of NATO is attacked, it has to inform other members of NATO, and they will immediately start consultations of what to do with this or that, and whether they would require anonymous decision, or maybe some countries will provide help and some others will not, and the countries that will provide the help will say, so why do we have to carry all the burden of providing the help? Why other countries are not providing the help? Other countries says, well, we are not in a position economically, at least at this time, to provide help, so you provide help, and then we'll figure out what to do next. So Article 5 of NATO is a joke. So there is no need for Ukraine to worry about joining NATO or have some kind of guarantee type of like Article 5 of NATO. It's all nonsense. Look at Budapest Memorandum. You don't need anything else. You need your own defense. And not only defense capabilities to deal with Russians. And you have to not even try to look for peace. You don't need peace because the war will start in next month or two again. You don't need that. You have to have complete defeat of the Russian army. That's your only goal. There is no other goals. Like there is one Ukrainian commentator, I think the Colonel Tsvetan, now retired. I looked at some of his videos. He's saying, don't worry about territory. You don't need territory. You need to kill as many Russians as you can. If you a day and you killed less than 1,000 Russians, then you lost. You have to kill Russians, at least 1,000 a day. More is better. 15 is better. A couple of thousand is even
Basically, if you can kill more Russians at a rate faster than they are able to replace them with credible forces, yes, then you have the capability of inflicting a decisive military defeat on the Russians. We are both agreed in that inflicting a decisive military defeat upon the Russian army is arguably the best and most certain way to achieve independence for Ukraine, rather than relying on inclusion in NATO. Inclusion in NATO would be in this scenario right now would be a luxury. It would be a nice to have, but not a must have, because
Jonathan, in my opinion, extending to NATO is more liability for Ukraine than any benefits, because as I said, the Article 5 doesn't work. And if it's not there, then what's the reason to join NATO?
Right. Yeah. Article 5, the way it was originally formulated during the Cold War, former Secretary of State Clark Clifford pointed out in a TV documentary. He said that what NATO essentially said to the Soviet Union was, attack any one of these member states of NATO, and you have attacked the United States, and you are at war with the United States. Now, as long as that was the driving force behind NATO, then NATO had tremendous deterrent capability.
I agree
One,
with you.
right, yeah,
The wording, though, of Article 5 is different.
yeah,
Please.
right. The implication was meant to be
Yeah,
the attack.
agree.
That was the implication. Now, as we say in practice, as you quite correctly point out, it does not necessarily mean that all members of NATO are automatically going to. It's not like a World War I alliance, in which all members immediately start mobilization and begin going off to war, and there's no stopping it. Article 5 is much different, and there is. Some members could voluntarily opt out of responding under Article 5.
But you see, Jonathan, in my opinion, it was a very good response to Warsaw Pact.
Yes.
Where Soviet Union was a leading country, but I don't think it's really vital today when there are India, China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia are now demonstrated to the whole world. It's only blind people will not see that they are together. They are going to act.
Are they? Who's the leader?
The leader, China, obviously.
China. Okay.
Yes.
Now this gets interesting. What are China's long-term objectives? Here's an interesting thing. Keep in mind that many of the territories that border China, particularly in eastern Russia and Siberia, those once belonged to China.
Yes, that's true.
And here's where the alliance could quickly become not an alliance of more or less equals, which they certainly are not equals, but it could become what I call a hegemonic organization, a hegemony dominated by China. And in which case the alliance would not necessarily be held together by voluntary cooperation or unity, but it would instead be an hegemonic alliance driven by essentially the fear of China.
You're absolutely right. And it's not only that, it's also convenience of Russians because they're already under China. They lost their independence a long time ago. So it is convenience to portray some kind of a strength. We are attacking, we are doing this and that. So China is very happy about that because Russia is doing their job as to fight against the all West and United States. And China is...
yeah, they're hanging back. They're in a sense performing the kowtow.
Yeah.
Putin is kowtowing to Xi. So yes, Xi would be very happy with that. This produces a very interesting dynamic. And keep in mind that the Golden Dome project or effort is not an all or nothing capability. It is an incremental buildup, a progressive buildup of missile defenses for the United States. And the decisive element, as has been implied in the proposed spending bill, the people implicitly recognize what I call the hole in the Golden Dome is, and that is that they have this $900 million allocated for the study of space-based interceptors. Well, guess what? There are only really two types of space-based interceptors, only one of which the Golden Dome project is proposing to study. Space-based interceptors essentially in the form of satellites, in which you have satellites armed with lasers or other forms of kinetic intercept capability that would be able to intercept and destroy missiles, preferably in their boost phase when they're on their way up, or at the very least in mid-course once they enter low Earth orbit. But the other means of space-based interceptor is one which no one is discussing, except for us, of course, which we've discussed previously. That would be the upgrading of the U.S. Space Force with a space fleet. And we're not talking about that many ships in the fleet. We're talking about potentially, let's say for the sake of argument, 12 starships. You buy them from Elon Musk SpaceX. The Pentagon upgrades those starships with laser weapons, which we have in the inventory, which could be adapted to Starship. And those starships would become the firing platform with which to intercept nuclear missiles in their boost phase. If you have a combination of starships with satellites, rather than just relying on satellites by themselves, because if you just have satellites by themselves, then those Russian and Chinese counter space satellites against our satellites, Again, you have what I've described before. You have a Mexican standoff in low Earth orbit, in which the side that fires first has a decisive advantage. In order to prevent that type of situation from happening, you would have to have a space fleet supplementing and protecting that. It's very complicated, and it's something which I believe the people who are proposing the Golden Dome have not yet fully realized or studied. They could do this, by the way. They could study it through the use of war games. War games are a very favorite tool of the U.S. military. In particular, all services conduct war games. And more recently, of course, the one in which I participated back in 1997 was the first free play strategic level war game, computer assisted war game.
Yeah, Jonathan, you're right. Maybe there's definitely something to look, and maybe in our next programs we will turn back to this concept. In the meantime, I would like to thank you very much for today's program. It was very helpful and informational. And have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday, same place, same time. Glory to Ukraine. And
God bless you. God bless America. And come on, Sasha. Come on, God bless who else.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.